GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for...
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to Brazier Fast-Paced News from 4 until 6. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, the countryside story the urban media missed, how the oil rural folk used to heat their homes doubled in price, but nobody in the news seemed to notice. Well, we did. Also, the Scottish politician who says it's time to formally recognise Anglophobia, the irrational hatred in Scotland of English people. Neil Oliver will join me. And the tanning drug advertised by online influencers that may be causing cancer. Alongside me when the taxi deposits are outside our building for the next 2 hours, the commentator Lynn May. But first, the headlines with Miranda.
Thank you, Colin. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 4. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Dozens of sacked P&O ferry workers in Dover have clashed with motorists after blocking a road close to the port. In the last few hours, the firm made 800 staff redundant with immediate effect after making losses of around £100 million. It's also said it was suspending voyages for the next few days. Unions are advising their workers not to leave the ships. The RMT says they've received reports that security guards are trying to board ships at Dover to remove crew. A spokesman for the Prime Minister says the way P&O workers were informed of job losses was completely unacceptable. Rescue workers are continuing to search for survivors after a theatre in the city of Mariupol was hit by an airstrike. The number of casualties is still unknown, but it's thought hundreds of people were sheltering inside at the time. A satellite image before the strike appeared to show the word children written in Russian on the pavement. Moscow has denied its involvement in the shelling. The UK says it will deploy its medium-range anti-air missile system to Poland as NATO moves to increase security along its eastern flank. During a visit to Warsaw, the Defence Minister Ben Wallace also confirmed Britain would send a further 100 troops to the country. The Ministry of Defence says the Russian invasion of Ukraine has largely stalled on all fronts, having made minimal progress on land, sea and air.
I hope this sends a message to the Kremlin that don't doubt us for 1 second, that we will stand together, stand up for our values and defend our friends such as Poland from any further aggression.
The Kremlin says it will disregard the UN's International Court of Justice demand that Russia halt its aggression. Moscow says talks with Ukraine are continuing today via video link. It's as NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg urged President Vladimir Putin to pull back his forces to avoid more bloodshed.
NATO has a responsibility to prevent this conflict from escalating further. That would be even more dangerous and would cause more suffering, death and destruction.
Well, back here, Met Police Officer David Carrick has been charged with 12 more sex offences. The Crown Prosecution Service said that he now faces a total of 41 charges against 11 women between 2003 and 2020. Mr Carrick previously faced 29 charges against 8 alleged victims, including rape, coercive and controlling behaviour and sexual assault. The Bank of England has raised interest rates from 0.5% to 7.75%. It comes ahead of an inflation hike expected next month, that's estimated to reach around 8%, which the bank warns could peak even higher later in the year. It was already set to be the biggest rise in 30 years. The British-Iranian charity worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been reunited with her family in the UK. The 43-year-old was released from detention in Iran, where she had been held for 6 years. Fellow British-Iranian Anousheh Ashouri was also released after being detained for nearly 5 years. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng told GB News he's delighted she finally has her freedom back.
It does show that diplomacy can work. I think we worked very, very hard. The Foreign Office worked very hard. Liz Truss, I think, worked very hard. But beyond all of that, what she went through, I think, is unimaginable. I mean, to be in a prison in Iran, not knowing whether you'll ever be released, it must be an extraordinary thing that she suffered, and I'm delighted that she's back.
And the BBC says it's reached a substantial settlement with Diana, Princess of Wales Private Secretary Patrick Jeffson. The broadcaster says it acknowledges serious harm was caused to Commander Jeffson as a result of the Martin Bashir Panorama interview in 1995. It says it apologises unreservedly to the commander and has paid a substantial sum in damages. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Brazier.
Coming up this hour, there's some disquiet in the tanning booths, the sunshine drug advertised by influence that may be causing cancer. And Neil Oliver will join me to discuss whether anti-English sentiment in Scotland is banter or bigotry. But first, there were howls of outrage when city centre petrol stations recently started selling fuel at over £2 a litre. But in the countryside, the rocketing cost of fuel has had a dramatic impact that has largely been ignored, getting on for 2 million homes in the UK and not on the mains for gas. Their central heating and hot water relies on tanker deliveries of domestic oil, which they store in a tank, usually in the garden. Last month, the price of this domestic heating oil more than doubled. It's a much bigger rise than anything seen on the forecourt, but it's a hike that's been largely overlooked in the media, perhaps because most of the people who work in news live in big cities. Well, the Chief Executive of the Countryside Alliance, Tim Bonner, joins me now to ponder on this one. Tim Bonner, appreciate your time. It's a really big jump, this, but it's not been much noted.
It hasn't been much noted, and you know, fuel poverty is a significant issue in the countryside. Poverty is a significant issue in the countryside, but as you say, that's not noted either. There's not enough noise made and not enough people listening. But the fundamental issues here are that we're seeing the price rise, as you've said, almost double. And not only does that have an impact, but there's no energy price cap. You know, we're not in a situation, people who are off gas mains aren't in a situation where the government is overseeing how much that can rise. And on top of that, we're now seeing a spate of theft, as the value of your tank of heating oil is £700-800, even for a relatively small 500-litre tank. And so we're seeing people not just having to pay these exorbitant prices, but then having their oil stolen.
It's a really important point you make, actually, and it's not what I made in my introduction and ought to have done, that there is no upper ceiling on where the price can go.
and nor do these people have any choice. You did make that point, and it's a critical one. You can't swap to gas. There is no other option other than burning logs, perhaps, and the government's not very keen on that either at the moment. So the government needs to think very carefully about how rural people, and especially those on low incomes, are being affected by this. No one's asking for anything out of turn. No one's asking for special measures. But as this cost of living crisis comes across the country, it will affect people in rural communities as much, if not more. If you're paying £2 for £2 for a litre of petrol, and you've got to drive 20 miles just to get to the supermarket, then that's having much more effect on you. And so it is critically important, and we'd like the government to consider how it can look at putting some sort of cap or some sort of control on the upward end of the price of oil. Hopefully we've seen the worst of the rises, but who knows? After the last few years, none of us is going to take any bets on what's going to happen in the next 6 months or the next few years.
When you talk about prices doubling. I mean, I know it's gone down a little bit since then, but it actually doubled in price in the space of a couple of weeks. Just nail one lie, Tim, right now, and there'll be people listening who don't have much association with the countryside, and they'll think, well, if you've got an oil tank, you're probably sitting pretty, you've got a nice big house, that's why you need a big oil tank to heat it. It's not true.
No, it's not true. In some of the most impoverished areas in this country, in fact, in the EU, we're in rural areas. If you look at some areas, the rural West Country, rural Wales, and the north, these are areas with very, very low incomes. And if you live in a house, it may be a privately owned house, it may be a rented house, it may be a council house, but you still, if you're in a remote rural area, you're not going to be on the gas mains. You're not going to have any choice. Oil is probably your only choice. And as we say, if the price doubles and your tank's empty, you haven't got any choice. You've got to fill it up. I think there's a job to be done, and there's a job absolutely for government to understand that poverty is not an urban issue. Poverty is an issue across the whole countryside. And when we're talking about levelling up, we need to think about levelling up within communities as well as between communities. There are some the difficult times ahead for many in a rural community. There's some really fundamental changes to the way that farming is working and agriculture, the way that income is coming into the countryside. And there is this gloss, the idea that we're all living in leafy villages in wealthy parts of the countryside. That's simply not true. The statistics show that, and something like a doubling of price on your heating oil can cause and is causing real concern in rural communities.
Tim Bonner of the Countryside Alliance. Tim, thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Lynn May has come in while I was doing that interview to join me. It's not fair to put you on the spot with that story because I know your taxi was delayed, but it's nice to see you.
Have you missed me?
Yes, I'm glad you're here. We'll talk about our next story once we've covered it. And it's this one. It's Ukraine. Russia has now lost more troops in Ukraine than America did in the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan combined. US officials say that Putin's invasion force has sustained 7,000 fatalities. That is half the number cited by Ukraine, which claims 14,000 Russians have been killed, but it's still a huge number by the standards of modern warfare, and given that the conflict has been raging for less than a month. Well, joining me now is Major General Chip Chapman, regular contributor here. Chip Chapman, thanks for your time. Just on those numbers, I mean, obviously there's this big discrepancy between what the Americans are saying and what the Ukrainians are saying, but nonetheless, we're into the thousands.
We are, and to give you a benchmark from a British perspective, 7,100 armed service personnel have been killed since 1945. So in the last 75 years, really, we lost 7,100, and the Russians may be over that already. So that is your benchmark from a British perspective, and it's a lot. Now, I always say that 2/3 of initial reports are wrong, misleading, or inaccurate, and that quotes Field Marshal Wavell, because it's difficult to really count these things in finite detail. But we can say that this grinding goes on in the war, and the Russians are not achieving any of their operational objectives. So it's difficult to see how they can get out of this fix unless they do something really dramatic and have something like a chemical shock and awe to try and break the will of the Ukrainian people. Now, that would be absolutely horrific, but they are not going to achieve any of their operational objectives. Their equipment and personnel are getting chewed to pieces by a very courageous Ukrainian force, and they're just not going anywhere. And I keep saying on this program that it seems to me that they will culminate to get to a point where they can go no longer any further on offensive operations in the next week or 2 weeks.
And some of the talk at the start of this week that we had about maybe Zelensky saying that it might be realistic, that the peace talks were proceeding on a realistic basis, and that was taken as a sign of a positive note by many observers. And it felt like we might get that unexpected thing, the early breakthrough in negotiations, but that seems to be slightly becalmed now.
Yeah, I never personally expected to get to that position, because you've got the things which just will not be negotiated on by the Ukrainians. Crimea must be returned to Crimea must be returned to the Ukraine. The Donbass must be given back to the Ukraine. And we're back to the Minsk conundrum. All the things which went wrong from the February 15 agreement, when they wanted a ceasefire, the Russians to withdraw from the country, Crimea to be handed back, and the Donbass to be handed back with then maybe some form of limited government. That's what the Ukrainians want. You're never going to get to a position where the Ukrainians are going to concede the Crimea or the Donbass, because that would tell you that force absolutely wins. And two of the things which Putin upset in terms of going to war in the first place were, of course, the Bucharest Memo of '94, which guaranteed the independence of Ukraine, and the Helsinki Agreement of '75, of which they are a member, along with many other countries as part of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is no borders should be, or the territorial integrity of borders is guaranteed, and no country should cross them and go to war.
I wondered, Chip Chapman, what you made of Zelensky's appearance before German legislators. He really laid it on the line for them. It didn't go quite so far as saying we wouldn't be where we are had you being a little less cosy with the Russians, but he came pretty close to that.
Yeah, and I think Zelensky and Zelensky's scriptwriter are absolutely fantastic at playing the right buttons to the right audience. You know, he did it in the UK with Shakespeare and Churchill and 9/11 and Pearl Harbor with the Americans. He knows how to play the audience in terms of emotional responses. And you can only convince an audience in three ways: by pathos, emotion, and lots of his appeal is to emotion. That sways people and gets your standing ovations. By logic, which he's not managed to get people to concede to things like the no-fly zone, or by ethos. I'm the expert on what's happening in Ukraine. Please listen to me and support me. And he's done an incredible job in most of those, but we still have the reluctance, for good reasons, in many areas. And the reluctance on the no-fly zone and for NATO to get involved is because never disturb your enemy when he's making a strategic mistake. And if we were to come in now, and by we were, I mean NATO, that would play into the narrative of Putin of, see, I told you all along it was about NATO. Let him destroy himself internally by not intervening at the moment, unless something horrific like a chemical attack takes place on Kyiv or something like that.
Chip Chapman, as ever, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Lynn May will be with me for the next 2 hours, and we've talked about what's happened in Ukraine over the last month before. Where are you in terms of your engagement with the story? Is it still something that's gripping you and your friends?
Yeah, I am a bit worried about the West's narrative of overinflating Zelensky's abilities to be able to go up against Russia. I think we have encouraged him. We've never seen war which has actually played out on social media. And I think whether it's people online, whether it's companies, the media, they're making him really believe that he can take on the world. And I think for Ukrainians, that's amazing. But the reality is, I think they're playing a dangerous game, because if we're not willing to, as NATO, to send more jets or to intercede or to commit to a no-fly zone, essentially they're on their own to a degree when it gets really serious. So I'm very careful with this whole, overzealous confidence of Zelensky. And I think maybe he does need to consider, I'm not saying to adhere, but consider what Russia is asking for so they can come to some agreement, because that's where the border is. We're not there.
But just consider this. I mean, there is a sort of great man theory of history that says actually it's still, individuals still matter, and the fact that he is this big personality with a lot of authority at home and internationally matters. But it matters for this reason. It's not always one that people have considered. If, as inevitably we hope, we come to both sides sitting around a table and discussing how to stop this war, then it matters that he can carry the argument. And if he's unassailable, if his own people trust him, then it will be easier to sign a peace deal.
Yeah, but his trust comes also with being realistic and coming to some sort of conversation and understanding so the war can be stopped.
OK, Lynn, thanks very much indeed. Now, we learned this week that Camelot has lost its grip on the national lottery after 3 decades. Ticket sales have raised many millions for charities, but winning big, well, it's also produced a litany of folk who couldn't cope with the transformation that sudden wealth entails. Lots of stories over 30 years, obviously. Take Callie Rogers from Cumbria, the lottery's youngest winner. It's changed now. You could, at that point, buy a ticket at 16. She was working at her local checkout when she won £1.8 million. She left her job, gave away £500,000 to friends and family, and spent the rest on parties, breast enhancements and designer clothes. Last year, the mother of 4 was reportedly claiming universal credit. Or there's the even sadder case of Mukhtar Mohideen, a factory worker from Blackburn who scooped the first rollover jackpot worth £17.9 million. He was subsequently shunned by his local Muslim neighbours for gambling, went through a divorce and spent thousands on escorts and a lavish lifestyle. By the time of his death, 5 years ago in his early 60s, he was living in a B&B in Blackpool. And then there were those who won millions even though they were in trouble with the law. The case of Lee Ryan is one particular example. Was awaiting trial for car theft when he won £6.5 million on the lottery. After his release from prison, he bought supercars, a mansion, a plane and a helicopter. He was reportedly last known to be living in a 2-bedroom rented flat in South London. So what can the new lottery provider do to ensure that sudden wealth doesn't end badly? And do those stories that I listed there make us think twice about whether it is such a good thing as we now seem determined to believe about the National Lottery? Lynn May, your thoughts on this one, Lynn? I take a really unconventional, I think quite unconventional line on the National Lottery. I would never have started it. I'll get onto that in a second. But just how can you can coach people, can't you, to deal with a sudden windfall and help them through it?
I think if you've never had large amounts of money, you're not going to be very wise with it on how to spend it. So I don't know if there can be some sort of partnership with a charity that deals with money management when someone manages to win an amount like that. But what you don't want to do is start, you want people to have autonomy with what they do with their money. Maybe it was someone's dream to just splash everything.
Who are we to say they shouldn't blow it?
There you go. So, I don't know, it's a tricky one, but I definitely think there should be someone there, like an organisation that people can go to have advice.
Well, there is. I mean, to be fair, Camelot do, and I think some of the early examples helped spur Camelot into action. They realised that actually this is life is utterly transformative if you win these sums of money, and they had to provide some help, some psychological help, some lifestyle help people make some financial planning and all the rest of it. Do you agree with it in principle? Do you have a problem with the idea of the state sponsoring gambling?
But then the thing is, it's like what you said, the lottery has helped so many charities, like one of my mother's charities specifically, the amount of money that it's been able to raise, there is good that comes from it.
Is it not a tax on the poor? It's a really regressive tax.
Yeah, but I think, again, it's about self-ownership of what you decide to do with things.
Yeah.
And I think there needs to be more emphasis placed on autonomy for how you deal with finances and being able to say no. We can say that about anything. Should we stop selling alcohol? Should we stop selling anything that potentially could drive people into, negative situations?
I just wonder sometimes whether once a week people buy that ticket and they start to dream the dream, and it encourages this life lesson that actually your fortunes are not in your gift. If you become rich, it's because you're lucky, rather than the sweat of your brow, the application of your wits, pure bloody hard work.
Yeah, and you don't appreciate it as much, do you? When you have quick money, it's not appreciated.
No, I don't know about that. Lynn May, thanks very much. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up on today's show, the UK's largest ferry operator is in crisis, sacking 800 staff and stopping all its services. Our reporter is in Dover, but first we'll have a look at the weather.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. Plenty more spring sunshine to come over the next few days, but the nights are still just longer than the days, and certainly long enough for a touch of frost overnight under largely clear skies. High pressure is dominating. We do have this weakish weather front that's been drifting across northern Britain through the day, bringing a few showers, but it is fading away. We'll keep one or two showers going across the Western Isles, the Northern Isles, and maybe a few across the Highlands through the evening, but generally they're fading away, and certainly showers elsewhere dying out, and it's going to be a largely dry and clear night, and we will see that frost forming across northern Britain. Further south, it's fog that's likely to form, and it could be quite dense in places, and it may last for much of Friday morning. So certainly through the morning rush hour, some fog over parts of the Midlands, Wales and southern England. Further north, a bright start, a cold start, yes, but plenty of sunshine. And further south as well, the mist, low cloud and fog should be gone, certainly by late morning, and then it's sunny spells pretty much across the board. Temperatures will respond to that sunshine as well. Look at this, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 is possible. A little cooler with the breeze across the northwest. That breeze will strengthen further during Friday evening, and the breeze just starting to pick up across southern parts as well. Again, with clear skies, it will turn quite cold through Friday night, but not as frosty because there will be more of a breeze, and that should just about keep the temperatures a touch above freezing. Saturday is another sunny day. There will be a noticeable wind across the south of England, South Wales and Western Scotland and Northern Ireland. But in the sunshine, again, temperatures getting up to 14, 15, 16 degrees Celsius, feeling pretty pleasant if you can get out of that breeze on Saturday afternoon. Sunday, slightly different, more cloud around, more of an easterly breeze along the east coast and a slightly cooler feel with one or two showers across the southeast. Bye for now.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching Colin Brazier on GB News on TV, online and on the radio. It's 27, nearly 28 minutes past 4. Now, P&O Ferries It's fired 800 seafaring staff with immediate effect, but some crew are defying orders and refusing to leave their vessels in protest. Workers are understood to have been told the news via a Zoom call. The ferry firm said what they described as tough decision was made to secure the future of the business. Well, let's turn to our reporter Ellie Costello, who's in Dover for us today. Ellie, over to you.
Good afternoon, Colin. Well, yes, Dover is reeling from this shocking news that P&O Ferries has sacked 800 staff, which is all of the crew on its entire fleet with immediate effect. And we know that the ferries will not operate for at least, the company says, the next few days. Now, we've heard that some crew are defying orders to leave their ship and they are staying in their cabins as a sign of protest. I was just speaking to a woman here who says that her friend is on the ship. She's been working for P&O Cruises for the past 20 years and she has spent the whole of today in tears. P&O is one of the UK's leading ferry companies. It carries more than 10 million passengers a year. That was pre-pandemic, and 15% of all of the freight cargo in and out of the UK. So this is a huge shock, Colin. And the company, we expect, is going to be using agency work, which is reportedly a lot cheaper than British workers, to keep these ferries running, and current staff will be able to apply to do this agency work. Now, the company says that staff have been offered compensation packages. That is in appreciation of the fact that they have been given no notice. They were reportedly told this news on Zoom this morning on a pre-recorded message. They did not see it coming at all. On Twitter, they've said that all sailings between Dover and Calais will not run, and passengers that are booked for today and the next few days should be looking to book with rival ferry companies. Now, P&O says that this was a tough decision that was made to secure the future of the business. They say that they were making a £100 million a year loss. They were in a black hole, and this was the only way that they could keep the business running. Well, Colin, now I'm outside the offices of the Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers, which is the RMT union. They have been protesting behind me for the past few hours. You might be able to make out the RMT flags here and heavy police presence. That is because RMT union members were actually blocking these two roads about an hour ago. There were lorries and cars that were tooting their horns in support of the RMT. They have now gone inside. They are in quite an intense looking meeting. I expect they'll be in there for quite a long time, probably thinking about their reaction to this news in the next few days. But this is a developing story, Colin, and I will keep you updated on GB News as it develops.
Ellie, thanks very much indeed. Ellie Costello there. Just a tweet I see the last 15 minutes from my GB News colleague and one of the originators of the entire Brexit process, Nigel Farage, who tweets, "It's a disgrace that cheap foreign workers will replace 800 sacked P&O Ferries staff. Brexit was about putting our people first." I don't know whether the agency staff are foreign workers. We'll try and get to the bottom of that. Let us know your thoughts. First, let's bring you up to date with the latest news headlines with Miranda.
Thank you, Colin. It's 4:31. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Police have intervened after dozens of sacked P&O ferry workers blocked a road close to the port of Dover. The protest comes after 800 staff were made redundant due to losses of around £100 million. Unions are advising their workers not to leave the ships. A spokesman for the Prime Minister says the way workers were informed of job losses is completely unacceptable. Rescue workers are continuing to search for survivors after a theatre in the city of Mariupol was hit by an airstrike. The number of casualties is still unknown, but it's thought hundreds of people were sheltering inside at the time. A satellite image before the strike appeared to show the word children written in Russian on the pavement. The City Council of Mariupol has also said that around 30,000 people have managed to leave. It comes as the International Committee of the Red Cross has called to allow safe passage out of the besieged Ukrainian city and allow aid in. Ukrainian officials report that over 350,000 people are still sheltering inside Mariupol. And Met Police officer David Carrick has been charged with 12 more sex offences. The Crown Prosecution Service said that he now faces a total of 41 charges against 11 women between 2003 and 2020. Mr Carrick previously faced 29 charges against 8 alleged victims, including rape, coercive and controlling behaviour and sexual assault. Well, on TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Stay with us. Brazier will be back in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Colin Brazier on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, a councillor in Morayshire has said it's time to recognise that anti-English sentiment in parts of Scotland must be called out for what it is. Anglophobia. Is that right? Is there growing anti-English bigotry north of the border, or is it just what it's always been, to some degree, simply banter? Sometimes quite hard-nosed banter. Well, I'm joined by the historian and commentator and my GB News colleague, Neil Oliver, to reflect on this. Neil, the obvious answer, I suppose, is to say it can be a bit of both.
Yes, I think that's right. When I was growing up, a long decades ago now, there was a lot of banter, I suppose you would say, especially around international sporting events, football and rugby in particular. Would also always bring that out. There would always be a bit of anti-Englishness going on in that context. But it was kind of like, it was 90-minute nationalism, I suppose. What's there now, though, after all these years of SNP dominance in Holyrood? It's yes, there is Anglophobia without a doubt, but the SNP and their supporters are phobic, frankly, about anyone who doesn't support them and or voices opposition to them and their policies. Their special loathing, I would say, stronger than any Anglophobia, is reserved for Scots like me who don't vote for them or for independence. For the SNP, it's all about support for them and for their call for independence. If you're English and you loudly support both, you might well get a free pass from the SNP and their supporters. If you're English and you're pro-UK and you vote for another party, then you'll have the same treatment meted out to you as gets meted out to anybody else that doesn't share the narrow nationalist worldview of the SNP.
Neil, you say you're in that special circle of hell that the SNP have reserved for you. I mean, I can't put that to them, obviously, but I'd suggest to you there might be another circle of hell. I've heard it said, you've heard it said, many of our viewers and listeners will have heard it said, I'm sure, that there is now a kind of spoken word purity test. I was interviewing earlier this week a chap called Jamie Blackett, who sounds English, but he's got a Scottish heritage as long as yours, if not longer, I imagine, and he says now something's changed. That he opens his mouth and he's judged in a way that's different to how it once was.
Yes, it's all symptomatic of the increasingly bitter, poisoned, toxic, febrile atmosphere that is politics in Scotland. It's very polarised. You're either in the independence camp or you're not. It's tribal. It's very strong. Yes, my dad-in-law is English born, but his dad was a Scottish miner, worked in central Scotland. But at the time when my dad-in-law was born, the family were in Kent, working in the coal mines there. But my dad-in-law John and his brother Billy have been in Scotland for half a century, and they've both experienced Anglophobia over the years, and I know that has been more noticeable for them in more recent years under during the SNP reign from Holyrood. Without a doubt, everyone who isn't loudly in support of the SNP and independence is increasingly liable to be under attack, metaphorically speaking, from the extremist wing of the SNP support, without a doubt. I mean, I've lost count. I don't even bother to count now how many English, friends of mine have been on the receiving end of that kind of, get lost and get back down to England where you belong sort of rhetoric. And this is directed at people who've by now lived most of their lives living and working in Scotland.
Do you think it varies from area to area? Is it worse in the central belt? Is it worse in Glasgow than it is in Perthshire, for instance?
I don't know. I mean, I have to stress, I've said this many times, I'm strongly of the opinion that the majority of Scottish people are not for independence, and they are not pro-SNP. The 2014 referendum, although the figure was 52-48 in favour of maintaining the union, of 32 local authorities in Scotland, 28 voted to remain part of the United Kingdom, which gives you a better sense of the strength of feeling that is for the United Kingdom in Scotland. And the vast majority of Scots are what they've always been, which is to say just decent, friendly, welcoming people. In the same way that, I mean, I've been all over the UK. I've worked in all parts. I've worked in Northern Ireland, in Wales and in England, as well as in Scotland. I've always been made welcome in all of those places. And that friendly sense of a united kingdom, of one Britain, I've always been an advocate for, and I've always been on the receiving end of it. And I think that it's important that people don't go away thinking that Scotland is only about that side that is represented by some of the SNP support, because that is a minority. The majority of Scots are what they have always been, which is friendly, decent folk, welcoming of outsiders, which is exactly the same as I have always. That's not a sense of national exceptionalism. I've always experienced that in England and in the rest of the UK.
And I think that, whether it's the 800,000 people of Scots heritage who live in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, or people who are in Scotland, there's still a great number, you and me included, who still, perhaps first and foremost, see themselves as British first, actually. Neil, Lynn May's alongside me today in the studio for the next hour and a half or so. She's got a question for you.
Hi, Neil. I just wanted to know, what does Anglophobia actually look like? How is it manifested? Because I know this councillor said, that it's worse than Islamophobia. But when we look at Islamophobia, we can see that there's tangible things that happen. Ignorance so far as thinking everyone that's a Muslim is a terrorist, or things like that. How is this manifested?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always wary about the phobia bit. You know, I mean, for me, a phobia is a very specific reaction to something, to a stimulus. I think Anglophobia is largely where it's directed at English people. It's usually about you. The undertone is usually that you don't belong here, that you are part of that imperialist colonising force that, you know, in the imagination of the hardline SNP support, those that are descended from the occupying English force, as they understand it, from hundreds of years ago. In answer to your question, I think in its simplest terms, it manifests as people being told they don't belong here and that they should go back to where they belong. I think that is largely how it's seen. You get it's become, I suppose, during the time of the SNP, they've become wily to being heard not wanting English people. And so some proxies have come into the discourse. So you'll hear a lot of, they'll talk about the Westminster parties or the London parties. And that's Westminster and the London parties is a proxy term for England. Westminster parties, the London parties are anybody who isn't the SNP. So you'll hear a lot of the antagonism and the aggression directed in that way, because the SNP have learned that it's probably not good PR to be heard to be being anti-English. But having said that, you still see it during the time of the height of the paranoia around COVID. You know, there were people in hazmat suits. Well, you know, they're kind of like fancy dress, really, but they were dressed up and saying that the English shouldn't come into Scotland and infect the Scottish people with their English COVID. So that it's you are not welcome, you don't belong, and it's particularly hurtful because for so many people with English accents or of English families, people who've been living here their whole lives. You know, they moved up as children, or they've always been connected here, or they're from families that are, you know, like my in-laws, as I say, my mum-in-law is Scottish, my dad-in-law is English, and people have found themselves in a cleft stick. But it's go back where you belong.
Neil, it's sensitive territory, and you've guided us through it with typical dexterity, and I thank you for it. Neil Oliver there. Lynn May's alongside me. Just to reflect on the point, I would extend a point that Neil Oliver, I think, was making there about the nature of Islamophobia. It's a word I try not to use, and I'm not for a second denying the existence of anti-Muslim bigotry, which I just think is a much more helpful term. Doubtless there is racism directed towards people by dint of the fact they are Muslim. That's different from Islamophobia, which I think runs the risk of closing down legitimate debate about a belief system. It's like saying, you know, let's have Marxismophobia, and you can stop talking about Marxism. I want to be able to be free to carry on to criticise Islam, but that's very different from peddling bigotry towards Muslims. I just want to make that clear, because it's something I've said before.
I just wanted to know the difference, because I thought it was quite strange that the council actually compared the two when they're probably quite different. And like you said, anything with phobia attached to it, are we scared? Is that the conversation? I think that word is misused, to be honest with you.
Well, it's a story we'll come back to, I'm sure. And our thanks again to Neil Oliver. Now, the long-awaited online safety bill has been published. Nadine Dorries, Secretary of State for Culture, says the aim of the bill is to, quote, make the UK the safest place in the world to be online. Or in the words of my next guest, to, quote, turn the internet into a safe space. Dorries sought to assure sceptics today with articles in the Telegraph and the Mail arguing that the bill will in fact protect free speech online by stopping social media platforms from arbitrarily deleting content and censoring speech. So how can this bill lead to more censorship, or will it lead to more censorship of so-called harmful content, and stop censorship more generally? Joining me, the author and General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, that is Toby Young. Toby Young, thanks ever so much for your time. What do you make of what Nadine Dorries had to say? Are you assured?
I'm not assured, no, Colin. I had hoped that the dreaded phrase legal but harmful, this is the phrase that has got free speech activists like me so alarmed. In the white paper that was published some time ago and which laid the groundwork for this bill, it said that social media companies would be forced to remove legal but harmful content on pain of being fined 10% of their annual global turnover by Ofcom. That set off a lot of alarm bells, and we hoped that the phrase would be removed from the bill.
There had been, Toby. I thought there was a second draft where it had gone.
Yeah, well, it has been removed from the bill, but it's cropped up elsewhere. So in the press release put out by the Department for Culture, Media and Sport today on their website, the phrase legal but harmful occurs not once, but twice. And the great concession they've made is to say, we're not going to define legal but harmful content in the bill. We're going to leave it to the Secretary of State, i.e. Nadine Dorries, to stipulate what the legal but harmful content is that social media companies will have to remove. And she'll do that in the form of a statutory instrument that can be debated in Parliament. Now, I don't think that is a great improvement, not just because statutory instruments can't be changed, they can't be amended by Parliament, but I'm also concerned that even if Nadine Dorries manages to restrain herself and doesn't put too much onus on social media companies to remove legal but harmful content, if it's just things like encouraging young women to self-harm, then I don't think anyone would object too much to an obligation on social media platforms to remove that legal but harmful content. But in defining what it's likely to be in the press release, they use the word harassment. And that seems like a gold embossed invitation for various groups claiming to be speaking on behalf of various victims to say, no,
Toby,
if you say anything remotely disagreeable, then that'll constitute harassment. And so therefore, social media companies will have to take it down.
And it's on the statute books now, isn't it? Or it will be. And the problem is, even if it's not Nadine Dorries, there may be a future Secretary of State for Culture who of a more draconian set. Can we just these arguments are fascinating to people like us. I'm not sure to everybody, and they can feel a bit abstract. But just practically, if it is legal but harmful, that is on the statute books and then the lawyers get hold of and the campaign groups get hold of, what sort of things that you or I might say online would potentially land us in hot water?
Well, I think you could take a number of things that Boris Johnson has said over the years in his column in the Daily Telegraph and dating back to when he was editor of The Spectator, where I'm an associate editor. And I think those would constitute legal but harmful things under the new statutory instrument that Nadine Dorries is going to bring in which she stipulates what social media platforms will have to remove. I think there's a rumour that she wants to include hate speech. So things which are perfectly lawful to say, not against the law, offline will be prohibited online because they'll be defined as hate speech. And we know where that can lead. I mean, one of the members of the Free Speech Union we're trying to look after, Colin, is a woman who had a petition on change.org, a platform that will be in scope in this bill, taken down because she was urging the Oxford English Dictionary to keep the definition of woman as adult human female. Change.org took that down on the grounds that defining a woman as an adult human female is hate speech. And we've seen the phrase hate speech weaponized.
I think Nadine Dorries has just got
a... numerous times.
Yeah. Sorry, Toby, you just froze there. I was just going to make the point. I mean, one person's hate speech is another person's robust conversation, isn't it? I mean, heavens above, just before you joined us, I was trying to explain to Lynn May, my studio friend today, about the fact I'm very reluctant to use the word Islamophobia. I think it's really unhelpful. That's not to in any way demur from the idea there is such a thing as anti-Muslim bigotry. I worry that the word Islamophobia in the hands of some people is a deliberate attempt to close down legitimate criticism of Islam. Now, somebody could look at that and say, that's hate speech, pal.
I'm afraid, Colin, that if social media companies are under an obligation, a new legal duty, to remove hate speech from their platforms on pain of being fined 10% of their annual global turnovers, we're going to see scads of perfectly legitimate speech being censored by social media companies. I mean, it's not as if they don't already censor scads of perfectly legitimate speech. Gender-critical feminists are frequently banned from Twitter and other social media platforms. It's just going to get a lot worse under this bill. I mean, the defenders of the bill, Nadine Dorries will tell you, Nadine Dorries has said in the two articles you mentioned earlier that there are various protections for free speech built into this bill, that social media companies will have to exercise caution if they want to remove content of democratic importance or journalistic content. They'll have to have regard for freedom of expression. The problem is those duties are much, much weaker than their duty to remove content that is supposedly harmful to adults, including some legal content. Just to give you a sense of what these two legal duties mean, Colin, the duty of care in the bill, that's a Manchester City type of legal duty. The stuff about having to have regard for freedom of speech, that's more like Plymouth Argyle. They're not comparable, and Manchester City, I'm afraid, is going to win out every time.
Toby Young, we'll talk again about this, I'm sure, but thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Much more to come. We're going to have a look at the weather now, though.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. Plenty more spring sunshine to come over the next few days, but the nights are still just longer than the days, and certainly long enough for a touch of frost overnight under largely clear skies. High pressure is dominating. We do have this weakish weather front that's been drifting across northern Britain through the day, bringing a few showers, but it is fading away. We'll keep one or two showers going across the Western Isles, the Northern Isles, and maybe a few across the Highlands through the evening, but generally they're fading away, and certainly showers elsewhere dying out, and it's going to be a largely dry and clear night, and we will see that frost forming across northern Britain. Further south, it's fog that's likely to form, and it could be quite dense in places, and it may last for much of Friday morning. So certainly through the morning rush hour, some fog over parts of the Midlands, Wales and southern England. Further north, a bright start, a cold start, yes, but plenty of sunshine. And further south as well, the mist, low cloud and fog should be gone, certainly by late morning, and then it's sunny spells pretty much across the board. Temperatures will respond to that sunshine as well. Look at this, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 is possible. A little cooler with the breeze across the northwest. That breeze will strengthen further during Friday evening, and the breeze just starting to pick up across southern parts as well. Again, with clear skies, it will turn quite cold through Friday night, but not as frosty because there will be more of a breeze, and that should just about keep the temperatures a touch above freezing. Saturday is another sunny day. There will be a noticeable wind across the south of England, South Wales and Western Scotland and Northern Ireland. But in the sunshine, again, temperatures getting up to 14, 15, 16 degrees Celsius, feeling pretty pleasant if you can get out of that breeze on Saturday afternoon. Sunday, slightly different, more cloud around, more of an easterly breeze along the east coast and a slightly cooler feel with one or two showers across the southeast. Bye for now.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I've got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. We can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat.
Every weekday at 1, you're on the money.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, social media influencers, dozens of them, are promoting banned tanning products to millions of followers. A BBC investigation has found it's illegal in the UK to sell nasal sprays or injectables made with melanotan 2. It's an artificial hormone that can accelerate tanning. The unlicensed drug is dangerous, dermatologists say, and users should stop using it immediately. Let's turn to Dr. Raphael Alaya, who can ponder on this one for us. Doctor, welcome to you. How dangerous?
It's a pleasure to be with you, Colin. So, first of all, social media is a wild, wild west, and there's a lot of money to be made, evidently, and lots of people are doing very well off it. However, there are risks and there are dangers, and here we have a specific danger, which is, showing itself by people, getting cancer and melanoma, which is very dangerous. How dangerous is it? The question you ask. First of all, there's no proven evidence that it causes cancer. Otherwise, of course, it would not be being sold. However, an association has been shown. So, of course, more research needs to be done, and more research needs to be done on a host of other products that are new, innovative, and people want for a number of different reasons. But it's incumbent on the people that have power and position on products like this to be responsible and to have a moral compass. And when it comes to money potentially being made on the internet, often we see the moral compass is not there. We see fitness products, other food products, and other things like that. And here, who's it incumbent on? First of all, the influencers themselves, technology companies, that could be Instagram or Twitter or whoever else. Doctors, I believe, should understand what's going on here with social media, because a lot of people ask doctors, does this work? Is this dangerous? And I'm not sure a lot of doctors are going to have the answer for these things. Is it their fault? I guess that's a different question. So, yeah.
It's a question you've addressed for us, Dr. Alaya, and I'm sure there'll be people out there who'll be thinking afresh about it. Dr. Raphael Alaya, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. It's just gone 5 o'clock. Coming up this hour, as Camelot loses the contract for the National Lottery. After 30 years, we look back at those who won big and sometimes blew it all. Also, a major new report into racial segregation in the UK paints a picture of two very different Britons. David Goodhart will explain. And as Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe resumes normal life, I'll ask a British man wrongly held in an Indian prison what it took to survive in a hostile jail. Alongside me throughout the next hour, the commentator Lynn May. But first, we've got the headlines with Miranda.
Thank you, Colin. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 5. Top stories from the GB newsroom. Police have intervened after dozens of sacked P&O ferry workers blocked a road close to the port of Dover. The protest comes after the firm made 800 staff redundant with immediate effect after making losses of around £100 million. It's also said it's suspending voyages for the next few days. Unions are advising their workers not to leave the ships. A spokesman for the Prime Minister says the way workers were informed of job losses is completely unacceptable. The Defence Secretary has ordered an inquiry into how an imposter posing as the Ukrainian Prime Minister was able to speak to him on the phone. Announcing the news on Twitter, Ben Wallace hit out at what he described as Russian dirty tricks after being targeted. Mr. Wallace said he became suspicious and terminated the call after several misleading questions. The incident raises security concerns. An inquiry is now underway. Rescue workers are continuing to search for survivors after a theatre in the city of Mariupol was hit by an airstrike. The number of casualties is still unknown, but it's thought hundreds of people were sheltering inside at the time. A satellite image before the strike appeared to show the word children written in Russian on the pavement. Moscow has denied its involvement in the shelling. Meanwhile, Mariupol City Council says around 30,000 people have now managed to leave the besieged city. It comes as the Red Cross called on Russia to allow civilians a safe passage out and for aid to be brought in. Ukrainian officials say over 350,000 people are still sheltering inside the city. The Kremlin says it will disregard the UN's International Court of Justice demand that Russia halt its aggression. Moscow says talks with Ukraine are continuing today via video link. It's as NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg urged President Vladimir Putin to pull back his forces to avoid more bloodshed.
NATO has a responsibility to prevent this conflict from escalating further. That would be even more dangerous and would cause more suffering, death and destruction.
To other news, and Met Police officer David Carrick has been charged with 12 more sex offences. The Crown Prosecution Service said that he now faces a total of 41 charges against 11 women between 2003 and 2020, including sexual assault. The Bank of England has raised interest rates from 0.5% to 0.75%. It comes ahead of an inflation hike expected next month, estimated to reach around 8%, which the bank warns could peak even higher later in the year. It was already set to be the biggest rise in 30 years. The British-Iranian charity worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has been reunited with her family in the UK. The 43-year-old was released from detention in Iran, where she'd been held for 6 years. Fellow British-Iranian Anousheh Ashouri was also released after being detained for nearly 5 years. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng told GB News he's delighted she finally has her freedom back.
It does show that diplomacy can work. I think we worked very, very hard. The Foreign Office worked very hard. Liz Truss, I think, worked very hard. But beyond all of that, what she went through, I think, is unimaginable. I mean, to be in a prison in Iran, not knowing whether you'll ever be released, it must be an extraordinary thing that she suffered, and I'm delighted that she's back.
And the BBC says it's reached a substantial settlement with Diana, Princess of Wales's private secretary, Patrick Jeffson. The broadcaster says it acknowledges serious harm was caused to Commander Jeffson as a result of the Martin Bashir Panorama interview back in 1995. It says it apologises unreservedly to the commander and has paid a substantial sum in damages. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Brazier.
We've got a lot coming up this hour. We've got the story about the British paramedics who volunteered to treat the wounded in Ukraine but ended up, they say, effectively as cannon fodder. And why are Britain's ethnic minorities still reluctant to live in rural or coastal Britain? We'll be talking to David Goodhart about that. But first, the plight of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe regularly made headlines in Britain. Her husband and others kept her name in the media spotlight. Other cases, though, enjoy less scrutiny in spite of the efforts of loved ones. A few years ago, I tried to draw attention to the imprisonment of half a dozen British military veterans who were being held in what were really awful conditions in an Indian jail. They became known as the Chennai Six. And a few key family members in the northeast of England, predominantly, succeeded in turning a story that had been largely ignored into one which the British Foreign Office subsequently took seriously. They were eventually released, but not after years having to endure some pretty awful hardship. Well, one of those 6 men is former Parachute Regiment soldier Nick Dunn, who wrote a book about his experiences and joins me to ponder on them. Nick Dunn, welcome to you. I wonder if seeing Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe released from imprisonment after years being held in Iran resonated for you particularly.
Yeah, it's really
really good news that she's been released after so long. I spent 4 years over in India wrongly, so I know exactly how she's feeling, what it would have been like to be told the good news. For me, it still feels like yesterday, so many years down the line. And just that initial, when the family gets told, that would have been absolutely tremendous, especially for our daughter.
All the charges against you and your comrades were dropped, and this was in relation to the fact you'd been mounting a guard on board a commercial vessel against Somali pirates. You had legally registered arms, but there was an Indian patrol vessel that took a different view. You were taken into prison, and there was a legal process that then became interminable and couldn't be resolved. What were conditions like in the prison where you were held?
Well, the prison conditions were very bland and very basic. We were given a plate, a spoon, a metal mug, and 2 sheets initially. And later down the line, with the help of the British government, we were able to get these very thin mattresses. But when you're sharing a cell with nearly 23 people, with a hole in the floor as a toilet and a few vegetables, you know, it was definitely difficult. Sanitation, health deteriorated. It was just a nightmare, and God forbid how my family felt while I was in prison. I just took the initiative from my army training to get myself into a routine as best as I could while I was still mentally healthy, and just every day felt like a punishment for some crime I've not committed, and you just never know when the end game is, unfortunately.
Perhaps it was your army training, maybe it was just your general outlook, but you had a regime to live by, didn't you? We've talked before on this programme about Terry Waite's incarceration in the Lebanon. He was chained to a radiator in a windowless cell in the dark for years on end. But he had this regime that he lived by. He was able to exercise by walking around the cell. He would take his clothes off at the end of every day and put them under his mattress so they were pressed for the next day. He never lost his self-respect.
Yeah, you've got to physically try your best to get yourself into a little routine. And that's just like finding your feet around the prison itself. I'm not aware if she was able to leave her cell. I can imagine she might not have been, but we fortunately were. But it's still a horrible experience. We're in a country that we don't know the language, and the heat was just overwhelming at times, especially during the summer where it could get to like 50 degrees. And it just it literally takes you to that next level. And it's right when they say you never know what you're capable of unless you're faced with adversity. And it's left scars, unfortunately, for my time in India. It really has. But it's made me the person who I am today. So a negative out of a positive.
Yeah, I read somewhere that you ran a half marathon. I think one of your relatives, maybe your sister, was running a half marathon back in the northeast, so you ran a half marathon in the courtyard of the prison. But I also read you and your friends had to band together because you were targeted in prison.
Yeah, we were outcasts in prison. We were looked at through a different eyes, so to speak. And there was an incident in the hospital that was fortunately not as serious as people might have believed. But when emotions of myself, I lose control and I miss my family, you're going to get little scuffs in prison. And like I say, fortunately, no one was injured, but it could have severely been a lot worse, especially with certain people in prison with knives lodged in their dome of the mouth, which was quite frightening at times.
Wow. And Nick, I remember interviewing people from the group that eventually became the Chennai Six. And how important was it, that sense that people back in the UK were lobbying on your behalf? I mean, obviously, Nazanin has a wonderful husband who's gone into bat for her, embarked upon a hunger strike to make sure that the media and politicians never lost that focus on her particular case. If that hadn't happened for you guys, might you still be languishing there?
Well, I wouldn't have thought we'd be still languishing there, where a case would have been over and done last January. So I'm quite grateful that I came home when I did. But with my sister and all the other girls from other families who raised at the highest level on numerous occasions to get the British government to assist in doing more, because the British government know in July 2014 they failed us. Unfortunately, they did. They failed us. And we had to languish on phony charges for 3 more years. And that's not on. This needs to be prevented for future arrests. If your British country knows they are literally innocent, they should stand behind you. And I'm not just saying this just because I fought for Queen and country. I'm saying this as a British citizen. If you are innocent, you should have your government's back.
Nick Dunn, we appreciate your time and appreciate you telling us your story. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, how is multiculturalism getting on in Britain? Are people from different races and cultures mixing more or less? A major report from one of the UK's most high-profile think tanks attempts an answer. Policy Exchange spoke to former Prime Ministers and Home Secretaries for its report. It also assessed lots of population and census data. Well, among its findings were these: that white English communities are more segregated from ethnic minorities than they once were, not by much, but enough to notice. Non-white Britons remain reluctant to settle in rural or seaside communities. But minorities are mixing with each other more, increasingly in city suburbs or large satellite towns, the sorts of places we're talking about in the south, Watford, Swindon, mid-sized towns. And while there's been a return to some city centres by white residents, there remains, concludes Policy Exchange, in effect, two very different types of Britain. Well, the head of Demography, Immigration and Integration at the Policy Exchange is David Goodhart. You'll know him from some of his very well-known books that he's written as well. Lynn May's alongside me. And coincidentally, I'll mention this straight away, actually, David, because Lynn was explaining to me during the commercial break, I think it's fairly unusual, Lynn, that you grew up as an ethnic minority in rural Britain. Mm-hmm. Makes you quite odd.
Mm-hmm. Up to the age of about, I want to say 11, I was homeschooled in a tiny village called Gaisley. And my mother and myself were probably the only ethnic individuals in that village, which is near Newmarket. So it's quite unusual. But then I moved to Tottenham, which the majority of Tottenham Haringey is massively multiculturalism, where white British people are probably the minority.
Well, it gives you a vantage point to assess maybe some of what David Goodhart's got to say. Flag up your headlines, David.
Well, I mean, I don't think the story is that dismaying. I mean, essentially, we're seeing very little change. I mean, we've had an increase in the ethnic minority population. We're looking at the last 10 years. We're sort of getting in before the census results. You know, in a year or so, we're going to have the official census results. We've done analysis with the Weber Phillips data analytics company, and they do this analysis by names, looking at the kind of ethnicity of names. So it's not 100% accurate, but it's got a pretty good track record. And basically what we're seeing is more of the same in the sense that we have a dispersal, a sort of gradual dispersal of the ethnic minority populations out of traditional city centres into the suburbs and so on, partly as groups become more affluent and established. But they tend not to be going into whiter areas. They tend to be going into so-called super diverse areas. So they're mixing more, so ethnic minorities are mixing more amongst themselves, but then they're not mixing very much more, indeed, as you pointed out, a little bit less even with certain groups like the white English than before. So, you know, somewhere like London, you know, we're only talking, by the way, we're talking about neighbourhoods and to some extent about schools. Obviously, people mix outside those contexts. You know, if you live in London, you sort of think, you know, this is a very relaxed, you know, multi-ethnic, multicultural city, and even large parts of the southeast. I think you'd say the same thing. You wouldn't say the same thing, perhaps, in certain parts of the north, the famous division in
Northern
Mill
Towns.
You know, you come from Bradford originally, I think.
It's not a town. I always point out to people it's a very big city. Right. For your next report, David.
And you know, and the kind of divides there, I think, are deeper. But so I mean, in terms of our analysis of the data, there are some encouraging signs. There is some, the more affluent minorities are moving into some affluent white neighbourhoods. Oadby just outside Leicester, Kingston in South London is becoming more mixed. But as you were saying, seaside towns and rural areas tend to, I mean, perhaps for obvious reasons in a way, tend to be places that ethnic minorities are not going to feel so comfortable in. Now, I mean, people living amongst people like themselves, a lot of people will say, well, that's just kind of normal, and it is to a large extent. I mean, the problem is when it becomes sort of too deeply entrenched, and then, we do need, common norms and common attitudes as a society in order to pull together to solve problems, do you not find climate change.
Do you not find it a bit depressing, though, David? I mean, if you look on, look at the culture that we're immersed in, and I know you switch on a commercial break, and the message is one big, happy, socially cohesive, racially blind society, but that's not what the map tells you on the ground.
No, it isn't. And I think people are often rather kind of alienated by a kind of race politics that often seems to racialise everything and makes contact across ethnic boundaries more fraught and more nervous than it should be. I mean one of the interesting stats is looking at friendship across ethnic boundaries, and I think there is some more positive news on that front, especially amongst younger generations.
Can I just ask, initially you said that the research shows that it's usually a reluctance, and correct me if I'm wrong, with ethnic minorities integrating with white British individuals. How do you know it's not really the other way around?
No, I'm not saying that. It's mutual.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it happens both ways. But as I was saying, there is this phenomenon. It's called homophily in the technical term. People preferring, feeling more comfortable amongst people like themselves. I mean, you accept that. But when you're talking about sort of second, third, fourth generation people from ethnic minority backgrounds, you might expect, and I think you do find more mixing, more. We have one of the largest mixed race populations in Europe, and I think possibly the largest. So that is some evidence of.
Is there a breakdown of the different? Because I know it's extremely different. So, for example, a lot of Asian communities, they do stay within their own, whether that's due to language, religion. But then, for example, when we look at, say, black men, they're the most to date outside of their race, out of any other.
Have we got to be so much more precise? I mean, there's a massive difference. When we say Asian, massive difference between, I would suggest, Indian communities and certain Pakistani and Kashmiri communities,
of course,
and even Afro-Caribbean and African.
Massively different. Massively.
I mean, my local town has Africanised dramatically in the space of 20 years. A lot of care workers, a lot of NHS workers, and this was hitherto a wholly mono-ethnic town.
Where was this?
This is my nearest town. I'm not going to say where it is, but it's a sort of, it's not dissimilar to the sort of Swindons and Watford that you mentioned.
Is there a breakdown in terms of, because I know you just broadly say ethnic minorities, but as you said, that's really vast.
Yeah, I mean, we don't look at that in this particular paper, but I mean, the data is out there. Yeah, I mean, what we did establish is that the groups that tend to be most segregated, again, this is just in terms of neighbourhood and schooling, tend to be Muslim. Pakistanis and Somalis are the most segregated group. Sikhs to some extent, although Sikhs are very well integrated in many other respects. Yeah, I mean, again, it's just neighbourhood and to some extent schools. I mean, the majority, one slightly depressing thing, because schools you'd have thought is something that could be nudged by public authorities in the direction of more mixing, but still a majority of ethnic minority pupils go to majority-minority schools, and indeed 40%, in fact, slightly more than 40%, go to schools where the white British are 25% or less of the school population. So you're seeing that's partly a reflection of neighbourhoods.
Yeah, it's not a choice. I think oftentimes it's not really a choice. If you're positioned in we know social economic disadvantage is that disadvantage a lot of inner city ethnic minorities. They can't really choose where to live or where to go to school.
Yeah, I get the feeling we should have booked this one in for longer, but we've run out of time.
But it's interesting.
For the second time this show, I'm going to say it's sensitive territory, and we really appreciate you tackling it robustly and analytically and coming to talk about it as well. Thanks very much indeed. David Goodhart from Policy Exchange. Coming up, British medics who travelled to Ukraine to offer aid there say there were attempts to trick them into fighting and use them effectively as cannon fodder. First, though, time for a look at the weather.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. Plenty more spring sunshine to come over the next few days, but the nights are still just longer than the days, and certainly long enough for a touch of frost overnight under largely clear skies. High pressure is dominating. We do have this weakish weather front that's been drifting across northern Britain through the day, bringing a few showers, but it is fading away. We'll keep one or two showers going across the Western Isles, the Northern Isles, and maybe a few across the Highlands through the evening, but generally they're fading away, and certainly showers elsewhere dying out, and it's going to be a largely dry and clear night, and we will see that frost forming across northern Britain. Further south, it's fog that's likely to form, and it could be quite dense in places, and it may last for much of Friday morning. So certainly through the morning rush hour, some fog over parts of the Midlands, Wales and southern England. Further north, a bright start, a cold start, yes, but plenty of sunshine. And further south as well, the mist, low cloud and fog should be gone, certainly by late morning, and then it's sunny spells pretty much across the board. Temperatures will respond to that sunshine as well. Look at this, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 is possible. A little cooler with the breeze across the northwest. That breeze will strengthen further during Friday evening, and the breeze just starting to pick up across southern parts as well. Again, with clear skies, it will turn quite cold through Friday night, but not as frosty because there will be more of a breeze, and that should just about keep the temperatures a touch above freezing. Saturday is another sunny day. There will be a noticeable wind across the south of England, South Wales and Western Scotland and Northern Ireland. But in the sunshine, again, temperatures getting up to 14, 15, 16 degrees Celsius, feeling pretty pleasant if you can get out of that breeze on Saturday afternoon. Sunday, slightly different, more cloud around, more of an easterly breeze along the east coast and a slightly cooler feel with one or two showers across the southeast. Bye for now.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone. We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, two British men say they were used effectively as cannon fodder after travelling as volunteers to Ukraine. This is the story of Carl Walsh and Ollie Fonnell. They told the, the Daily Telegraph that they'd travelled to the war zone as medical volunteers, but instead they were told they would be sent to help defend the country's capital city. They were invited to give up their passports and sign up for a year's military service. Scores of Britons have volunteered for Ukraine's International Legion. Not all of them former soldiers. It raises questions about what awaits those who have gone and whether those who decide it's not for them will be able to do anything about that. Subsequently, let's turn to the security expert, Will Geddes, who joins me now. Hi to you, Will. I mean, I don't know how representative these two stories are, but it is an obvious reminder that it's one thing to be well-intentioned and want to do your bit, but then sometimes reality bites.
Without question, Colin, thank you for inviting me this afternoon. I've had a number of veterans who've called me over the last couple of weeks and said, I want to go down and get involved. And these are veterans who both wanted to fight, but also who were qualified medics who could go down and provide assistance. And I think anybody who was considering crossing the border couldn't be naive in believing that they wouldn't be necessarily sent to the front line, and especially if you're a medic, because inevitably the Ukraine forces were receiving and are receiving, many casualties, and they need that paramedic support.
Do you think it's also true? I mean, if I was part of that command and control structure deciding how to deploy a foreign legion of foreign fighters, I'd also feel there was a PR advantage to sending them into combat. Because, I mean, this is brutal stuff, but if they get involved in the thick of it and heaven forfend they lose their lives, then you draw in other nations, don't you? You can. I mean, this is brute stuff, but that's what we're talking about here when it's war.
Well, absolutely, but also those that are going down there, and there are three different types of foreigners that are participating in the conflict down there. There are those that obviously want to go and fight and join this resistance force. There are the second that want to provide medical support, but they're going as individuals. And then there are organisations like my own who are trying to provide humanitarian support. Now, any British national or foreign national who is captured by Russian troops over there will give the Kremlin a huge PR advantage. And as we know, the Russian troops are already taking Ukrainian hostages. If they're taking foreign nationals as hostages, well, this gives them enormous leverage in terms of any kind of ceasefire agreements or any kind of concessions that they may have imposed on them or demanded of them.
Just wonder what would happen to them, what their legal status would be. Will get us if you're one of these British volunteers and you're captured. How does Geneva Convention out of the window? Where do they stand?
Well, your guess is as good as mine, Colin. I mean, Geneva Convention should apply, but we've seen that there have been a number of civilian targets that the Russians have chosen selectively to target. We can't see this as necessarily just collateral damage. So as a direct result, how POWs are treated by the Russians is going to be very, very difficult to be able to gauge at this stage. I think in terms of the types of and the quality of troops from Russia that are on the ground right now, one can only presume that they won't be necessarily treated as per line of the Geneva Convention. And therefore, I think any foreign national, especially Brits that are choosing to go down there, they're putting their lives not only at risk when they're alive, but certainly if they're captured.
As ever, good to talk to you. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. Lynn May alongside me. Have you heard anybody in your circle, Lynn, say, I feel so strongly about this, I'd like to go and help?
Well, I actually interviewed a gentleman by the name of Luke. He owns a gym, and he's gone over there and he's helping at the moment. And he received quite a lot of flack for it, because why on earth would you go out there and risk your life and so on and so forth? But with regards to these two gentlemen, I think And this is not to sound mean, but you'd have to be an idiot to think that you can go over there to the centre of a conflict and choose specifically the job you want to do. You're going at a time where there's huge amounts of death, destruction, casualties. They're going to put you wherever they see it fit. You're essentially saying, here's my life, do what you want with it. So you have to really give it some consideration.
And you're going to join a hierarchy of command and control. You can't just go there and do your thing.
Exactly.
You're going to be, somebody's going to want to deploy you in a way that they feel fit and send you where they want to send you, not where you fancy moseying around.
There you go.
OK, we're going to reflect on that story a little later on if we get the chance. But we're also going to be talking about this one. The positive professor, Carol Sikora, is going to be telling me about the massive post-COVID cancer backlog. It's a theme that Carol Sikora stuck to over the course of the COVID pandemic. And of course, it's, as an oncologist, one of the country's leading oncologists, something he's been talking about for many years. So we'll have Carol on to talk about that backlog and what you might be able to do about that. But first, let's bring you up to date with the latest news headlines. Here's Miranda.
Thank you, Colin. Good afternoon. It's 5:32. Top stories this hour. Police have intervened after dozens of sacked P&O ferry workers blocked a road close to the port of Dover. The protest comes after 800 staff were made redundant due to losses of around £100 million. Unions are advising their workers not to leave the ships. A spokesman for the Prime Minister says the way workers were informed of job losses is completely unacceptable. The Defence Secretary has ordered an inquiry into how an imposter posing as the Ukrainian Prime Minister was able to speak to him on the telephone. Announcing the news on Twitter, Ben Wallace hit out at what he described as Russian dirty tricks after being targeted. Mr. Wallace said he became suspicious and terminated the call after several misleading questions. Rescue workers are continuing to search for survivors after a theatre in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol was hit by an airstrike. The number of casualties is still unknown, but it's thought hundreds of people were sheltering inside. A satellite image before the strike appears to show the word children written in Russian on the pavement. Meanwhile, Mariupol City Council says around 30,000 people have now managed to leave the besieged city. It comes as the Red Cross called on Russia to allow civilians to have a safe passage out and for aid to be brought in. Ukrainian officials say over 350,000 people are still sheltering in the city. And Met Police officer David Carrick has been charged with 12 more sex offences. The Crown Prosecution Service said that he now faces a total of 41 charges against 11 women between 2003 and 2020. Well, on TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Brazier will be back in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, now, what is the population of Ukraine? You've probably heard this bandied around in recent weeks. You may know it's about 44 million. What will it be in a decade? Well, I mean, that depends, doesn't it, on how many of the 2 million plus Ukrainians who've left as refugees, maybe more, decide to return to Ukraine. It's possible that some of the villages and towns that have been razed by Russian artillery may simply be abandoned for want of people to live there. But here's the thing, that was probably going to happen anyway to some of them, not because of Russian missiles, but because of a demographic time bomb. Ukrainian women have a fifth fewer babies, for instance, than British mothers. Ukraine, like many European countries, is failing to repopulate. If that seems a strange way of looking at this story, then that's because we're not used to thinking about how demography affects facts on the ground. But my next guest does think hard about exactly that. He is Paul Morland, whose new book, Tomorrow's People, examines how population changes pretty much everything. And Paul's here in the studio. I'm going to hold up the book, which, as you point out, is in Ukrainian national colours, which is entirely coincidental.
Indeed, yes. We didn't have an inside track on that, I'm afraid.
If somebody's thinking about buying this book, persuade them why it matters?
It matters because you can't understand anything that's going on in the world, seriously, I don't think, unless you get the big issues of demography. Where are populations surging? Where are they retreating? Where are they young? Where are they old? Where are they moving? And that has a very big effect on how likely they are to go to war, whether they worry about their future. It has a big effect on their economies, whether they've got people flowing into the workforce or out of the workforce. There are very few issues in the world today, whether we think about the EU, indeed Ukraine, as perhaps we'll come on to, what's happening in the global economy, what's happening in Africa and how Africa's becoming more and more important as its population grows, without understanding the demographic angle.
But it so rarely uses the prism to look at things. I mean, for instance, where Russia's concerned, or Ukraine's concerned, I remember reading a piece a while ago about the sort of Saving Private Ryan effect. So for those who saw the film, 4 sons, 3 die, 1's left. That idea of feeling not relaxed about your children going to war, but you can have a different feeling about it if it's your only child.
Yeah, I have to choose my words very carefully because my sister's got 4 sons and she's pulled me up on this. But the fact is, if you think back to, let's say, 1940, the average Russian who went to the front was probably one of 6 or 7 kids. And by then, a child perhaps of 1920, most of them would have survived. So that Russian soldier's likely to have had 2 or 3 brothers. Today, he invariably won't have a brother at all and may well not have a sister, will be an only child. Now, it's sort of very glib to say, oh, people with big families don't mind about what happens to their kids. Of course they do.
For the record, I didn't say that.
No, indeed you didn't. And I don't think anybody thinks it. But I think when you have small families, it's likely that you will hold on to them very tightly. Now, we don't know what's happening in Russia with regard to the body bags going home. There are all sorts of stories about moving crematoria, but at some point the message is going to get back. There's no doubt that size of families are already small in the period of the Afghan war, and that constant pressure back in Russia of boys dying. Of course, there was no such thing as public opinion in a communist state, but it had a drip-drip effect on morale, I'm sure, in a way that it didn't seem to back in 1940.
Yeah. Lynn, demography. You mean, is it something that...
No, I was just listening to what you're saying, and it is interesting to understand. For you to have a well-versed opinion on what's happening in the world, you do need to understand, birth rates and where people are moving and what they're doing across geography. I think that's really important.
And the big players in this, I mean, the Chinese in particular, are increasingly... I mean, the U-turn they have done is gigantic, from the one-child policy to now realising that actually that didn't work and quite the opposite's needed.
Well, gigantic, ineffective and not unprecedented. So gigantic because it's such a big country and it's such a big change. Not effective because there's no evidence. They've allowed people to have 2 kids for some time. Now it's 3 or more. And there's no evidence that the fertility rate in China is doing anything other than continue to fall, as it has fallen in all similar countries in East Asia without the one-child policy. So it's a lot about urbanisation, it's all about education, having small families. They are not going to get their fertility rate up. But if you look at Singapore, it's a very good example. In the 1960s, Lee Kuan Yew was saying small families. He wasn't doing anything as radical as the one-child policy, but he was desperately trying to get their fertility rate down. By the 1980s, he was trying to get it up. So these things can change quite quickly.
They're saying the more prosperous a country is, the lower the fertility.
Generally, that's true. But what I try and argue in the book is that there is an issue of economics, but there's also an issue of values. What we're starting to see emerge is communities that have high fertility rates despite their prosperity. And I think that's going to shape the future.
Snappy subtitle, the 10 numbers that we ought to be looking at. What's the one number you will draw our attention to today, Paul?
I would draw it to 2, if I may. Am I allowed to, for my desert island? So 1 would be the total fertility rate in Singapore being 1. And that's very significant. It's typical of course, Singapore's a small country.
You get into this doom loop.
It is the doom loop. It's the half, each cohort is half the size of the last one. And what that means for the economy, for the workforce, for schools, for old age homes, ageing. So that's one thing. The other number I would point out is the 4 billion Africans by the end of the 21st century. Now, back in 1950, there were 2 Europeans for every African. And by the end of this century, so 150 years later, there are going to be about 6 Africans for every European. Now, I can't tell you, therefore, X, Y, Z. I don't know exactly what the world will look like, but it will look very different because it will be so much more African. It's going to affect the economics, it's going to affect the politics, it's going to affect the geostrategy, it's going to affect the culture and the food. It will feel like a very different world where those ratios flip.
And for instance, if you're a country like the UK with strong colonial ties with countries like Nigeria and Ghana, that's going to change things like foreign policy and flows of people, but only necessarily to specific parts of Africa. And those relationships will really matter. If Nigeria, I know, is on course to be bigger by population, bigger than America quite soon, then it becomes a global power, doesn't it? And we have good relations with Nigeria.
Yeah, it becomes a potential global power. I mean, the African countries have got a lot of stuff to sort out. This huge population growth is an opportunity for them. They've now got to get their fertility rates down, so they have a large cohort of young working age people, but not then loads more babies under them. And that's when you get the chance, not the necessity, but the chance to start growing your economy, to develop and to become the kind of power, no doubt, they would like to.
And there'll be somebody listening to that saying, Paul Morland, why can he lecture Africans on why they need to get their fertility rates down? That's not what you said, I know, but that's sometimes how it's going to be characterised.
Well, what I try to do generally is not lecture people, but tell them what the consequences are of various choices. So it's very difficult for Nigeria to become a developed and prosperous country, as no doubt most Nigerians would want to be, while they continue to have 6 or 7 children each. I celebrate people who love children, as I know you do, and I think it's wonderful that there are people in the world who continue to have large families, and long may the Nigerians continue to enjoy their children and want children. But I think 2 or 3 is more compatible with a successful, powerful country than 6 or 7.
And just to finally wrap this up and bring this back to where we started with your Ukrainian flag-coloured book, when we think about median ages and how that affects the outlook of a people, if you are trying to bring 2 peoples together, for instance, to either make war or to make peace, this matters, doesn't it? If you look at, say, in Israel, Israel median age is here, Palestinian median age is here, who's more likely to be a bit more interested in peace and plenty? And I mean, again, I can hear people say, how dare he say that? But it's true. Younger people have different priorities from older people.
Of course it's true, although in the case of Israel, the fertility rate is quite high and they're pretty young. In the case of Ukraine and Russia, what I would say is, number one, it's a big surprise that countries that are so relatively old have ended up going to war. And it proves that demography is not everything, because they're quite old countries. But the other thing I would say is you're not going to see, however things turn out, I doubt you're going to see in Ukraine and Russia the kind of endless ongoing conflict you get in countries like Yemen or Libya or Iraq, where you have an almost endless supply of young men.
Lynn, might you buy that book? Has he sold it to you?
No, it sounds interesting.
Okay.
Definitely.
You can have a copy.
Can I have a copy?
You can. I'll even sign it for you.
Would you say that's similar to, and I know I don't want people to be offended, but almost like, in layman's terms, if you can't afford children, don't have them. Is that what you're saying, to a degree?
I worry about people in the developed world, in the rich world, who say we can't afford children, because we are actually better off than we've ever been. I think we have to prioritise children in the developed world, but I think we can have an evening up. We can have a decline of fertility rates in Africa, not to anything very low, but from their very high levels, because it is problematic.
Can I, just a quick one, Lynn. I mean, how many of your contemporaries, men and women, but women obviously especially, are saying, don't want kids, lifestyle disruption's too great, lost career momentum, bad for the environment? Anybody? Some of them? More than you'd expect?
You'd have to have incentives, or, again, like Poland does, when it comes to families. And at the moment in Britain, there's no real incentive to have children, unfortunately.
Wow, that's pretty bald, isn't it? OK. Well,
that's what many people think, you know, with the cost of living, with, you know, housing and everything, and now the woman has to work equally as hard as the man. It's like, where do you get the opportunity to be a really fantastic parent and raise that child if everyone is working all the time?
And that is what I hear from my children's generation.
Paul, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much indeed. Paul Morland, whose new book is out. Now, yesterday we had the historian David Starkey on my podcast in an episode which is now available on YouTube and Spotify. We've got a short clip of what Dr. Starkey had to say about, since we were just talking about the war in Ukraine, which he believes points to the collapse of the post-Cold War liberal world order.
Going back to Russia, so we've got, first of all, to believe people when they say something. Secondly, we've actually got to set aside our own prejudices. The great problem is that we've tended to assume, and of course it became very easy to assume after 1989, and we had all sorts of notions. Soviet Russia has collapsed. It is inevitable that the West will triumph. Liberal democracy will sweep the world. The end of history. You know, has there ever been a madder essay than that of Francis Fukuyama?
People lapped it up, David.
We lapped because we wanted to. And also it offered us all sorts of excuses. We don't need armies. We're going to triumph anyway. We can tear ourselves apart.
We can treat Russia as a neoconservative laboratory.
Or as a little puppy dog. We can treat Russia rather as Margaret Thatcher was accused of treating Scotland. Do you remember that with the poll tax? We can see, can we make a quick transition to a free, from a state-regulated economy to a free market economy? And can we do something else, which is, can we, as it were, by letting Russia, by encouraging Russia, become a free market economy, of course, miraculously, it will discover democracy. It will discover human rights. It will become just like us. Now, you see, there is an utter fundamental problem here as well.
Is it a kind of vanity?
It's a vanity. It's a vanity, again. I'm not, by the way, as much of an atheist as you think I am.
we'll get into that.
It's a vanity of human wishes. It's a vanity of wish fulfillment. It's, again, the tendency of human beings to think that what they are, everybody is. It's the thing that, of course, as a historian, you're constantly fighting against in yourself, and you're fighting against your students. You're saying to them, recognize other people have other values. Other times have other values. Other places have other values. And with Russia, that is, preeminently something we should be doing. And then finally, it seems to me, we've got to recognize, as I said, this extraordinary arrogance of the West, which led to a complete dropping of guard, right? But the fantasy that our way of life is a bit like McDonald's. It's for export and everybody wants it. This is a very, very important question. We've just had Tony Blair talking, he couldn't keep his mouth shut, even a bit like me, really, except I'm not a Knight of the Garter. But Tony Blair saying, what we should be doing, the fact that we should be deploying power and effectively threats of power. Yes, that's all very well. But Tony Blair illustrated with his adventures in Iraq and in Afghanistan, the fundamental problem. There are societies which are not susceptible to the Western way of life. Our way of life, our notions of limited government, our notions of rights, our notions of free speech, our notions of tolerance are profoundly culturally rooted. They're rooted in our history.
Dr. David Starkey, always very interesting. Available on YouTube and Spotify. My conversation with him as of about the last hour or so now. Over 500,000 cancer patients are waiting for NHS treatment, and the backlog could take years to clear. Tragically, it could come too late for some. Well, my next guest, Carol Sikora, is a world-renowned oncologist, of course, who's offered to open up his network of private centres to 30,000 of the most seriously ill. His not-for-profit offer, which would give access to life-saving therapies, has been put to NHS chiefs. He's waiting for their response right now. Carol Sikora joins us. Professor, thanks so much for your time. What are you offering?
Well, we have 4 cancer centres with complete equipment, chemotherapy, radiotherapy. The backlog is also in the diagnostics, and we've got diagnostic equipment, MRI scanners, CT scanners. And the idea is very simple. We're a growing network, but we've got spare capacity. We can work 12, 18 hours a day. We have to get the staff to do it, but we can do that. And we can offer it to the NHS. The problem we have is decision making. We already have NHS patients locally from local trusts who are, in some cases, hopelessly undercapacitized to the large number of patients that are coming forward. But it's even worse now post-COVID. So this is a recovery program, a temporary program. And I think other private providers, independent providers, are doing the same sort of thing. Getting decisions, though, is very difficult in the NHS.
We've talked, and you've had a big profile during the course of the COVID pandemic, and you've repeatedly banged the drum for people to recognise that there is going to be a huge oncological hangover at the end of COVID. The dust is just beginning to settle. It feels like we're moving into this sort of post-COVID phase. Is what you're seeing when it comes to waiting lists better or worse than you expected, or broadly in line with what you thought would be the case?
It's getting better. People have done back-of-the-envelope calculations. I mean, sophisticated ones, not real back-of-the-envelope stuff. And no one really knows how many missing cancer patients there are. We think it's between 50 and 80,000. Now, that means they're there, but they don't know they have cancer, and they're going to need treatment in the next 6 months. The problem is, the later you wait, the stage of the cancer goes from stage 1 to stage 2, 3, and 4. Outcome is poorer as you go up the stages, the cancer spreads. Not only that, the treatment, the optimal treatment, is more complex. So you need more chemotherapy, more radiotherapy. So very much a backlog in its true sense, and it's a hidden backlog. COVID was so obvious. We were all frightened. Those photos of footage of intensive care units, pretty frightening stuff, I agree. But cancer is much more insidious. We've got to get these people diagnosed and treated. We'll know when we look back in 3 years' time, we'll be able to see the big change in cancer survival during 2020 and 2021. The most important thing is to try and get out of it and get back to normal, normalize the whole system as quickly as possible.
That can happen, as you say, as quickly as possible, and we save as many lives as we possibly can as well. Carol Sikora, as ever, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it. Lynn May alongside, not to reflect necessarily on that story, but a story we were talking about during the commercial break, and it's, in a sense, it's the big domestic UK news story today, the sacking of 800 workers by P&O, their replacement by agency workers. I know Nigel Farage says they may be foreign nationals. We've been talking about this. What do you think?
I think they will be. In 2019, a Dubai-based company actually bought P&O ferries, and when we look at ferries, they don't fall under the same employment law, and that's why there seems to be this issue. But Nigel Farage was right. When it comes to Brexit, we're supposed to be putting the British people first, especially in the workplace and with employment. And I think when companies are bought out by foreign investors or, foreign countries, so to speak, then we need to ensure that the British people are looked after when it comes to those jobs and securing those jobs. And I just think that they've really been failed here.
Lynn May, fascinating as ever to have you in the studio commenting on the story today. Really appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. If you've got time, have a look at our poll. Lots of people answering it. It's about Anglophobia, the attitude of Scots towards the English. Let us know.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. Plenty more spring sunshine to come over the next few days, but the nights are still just longer than the days, and certainly long enough for a touch of frost overnight under largely clear skies. High pressure is dominating. We do have this weakish weather front that's been drifting across northern Britain through the day, bringing a few showers, but it is fading away. We'll keep 1 or 2 showers going across the Western Isles, the Northern Isles, and maybe a few across the Highlands through the evening, but generally they're fading away, and certainly showers elsewhere dying out, and it's going to be a largely dry and clear night, and we will see that frost forming across northern Britain. Further south, it's fog that's likely to form, and it could be quite dense in places, and it may last